Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, May 12th, 2021. Time for yet another show, regardless of all my best efforts to stop time and take an extra nap. It's just not working. All right, much to cover today. Greg Dworkin joining us with a roundup of, a little bit of everything, including the continuing slide into, the memory hole of the January 6th insurrection. There's a couple people being charged with crimes. That's nice. A couple dozen around the country. Low-level folks who have no impact on your daily life, who I guess will serve some time in jail, and it's good, and it's the way it ought to be. But no indication at all that there will be any price to be paid by, the once major political party that still apparently occupies the seats of half of our national legislature. And, hey, whatever, we'll forget about it and let bygones be bygones. Dozens, if not hundreds, of the companies that said that they would no longer allow financial support from their coffers to congressional candidates, members of Congress, etc., who voted to invalidate the Electoral College votes for Joe Biden, or who voted or who provided any material support for the organizations and the people who instigated the insurrection on behalf of Donald Trump, now just sort of putting that promise by the wayside and, what are you going to do? Politics, both sides, something. So it's getting kind of disturbing. And whatever, maybe we have a democracy, maybe we don't. Anyway, time for another wacky morning show. True. Much to report on, much to round up for you, and no lessons here for you, I don't think. Just keeping an eye on things. We'll see whether we learn something new today at any point, or just lament what's been going on in the past. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. We know this to be the case because I'm here, and I'm reading you this tweet that says so. Thanks to Bill in Portland, Maine, for providing it. So, the instructions, listen in as me, Kagro X, David Waldman, assures America, and there's nothing I'd rather do than assure all of you, that all of my horses are certified drug-free. That's the important thing. With the one exception of the colt in the corner currently tasting sounds and hearing smells. My goodness, what are we feeding these horses? Well, I don't know. Seems like an important story. I'm sure we should all focus our time on what happened with the Kentucky Derby. Although it does raise a couple of interesting questions about what do they do with all the bets that were paid off on that. I mean, there's probably records on all that stuff, and can you claw back payments made at the track of those things? I have no idea exactly what happens with all of that, and we ought to pay closer attention to it and more attention to it than the attempt to overthrow the American government and democracy itself. And we likely will. So there you go. All right. Well, this is your first day back, perhaps, if you had a chance to listen to the podcast yesterday. Maybe not everyone is always caught up, but if you were a podcast listener yesterday, your job today is to tell Gil just how well he did with his announcement on our behalf, changing up, finally, the one announcement that I have always said would change things up a little bit, coming up with a new announcement to encourage all of you to be contributors of content to the show, as well as, of course, of material support in monetary form. Also supporting us with material, I guess. True recorded segments, and that's what he's made the pitch for. And you know how it is. You always, if you ever record anything and play it back, you always say, oh my God, my voice sounds terrible. But for other people who, A, don't know what your voice sounds like anyway, and B, think, that's what your voice sounds like. We're outside of your head listening to it, and that's pretty much how it sounds. This is your first experience being outside of your head and listening. And you're the one that's wrong about this, right? Okay. Well, anyway, he did a fantastic job. He scripted that himself. He just put it together, recorded the voice. I added some music bed to it like we've done with the ones in the past so that it's, we could go shopping for other music just to change things up even more. But we continue on the intro, outro, break music with it. And it sounds like we did it on purpose and it's totally professional. So everybody can tweet to him this morning. And, to help you find him on Twitter, we'll spell out the Twitter handle for you because it might be actually better for getting you there than trying to sound it out. But we have, if you were sounding it out, it's, Trebliconiqua, perhaps we might say. It's, his last name happens to be Aquino, and it's, I don't think I'm giving anything away. It's in his Twitter screen name here, but it's kind of sort of his name spelled backwards, but rather than just Gil, he uses the entire first name of Gilbert. So you can find him at Treblig, Trebly, G-O, it's one G, I've screwed it up already, Trebligoniqua. Yes, Trebligoniqua. How do you say it? Maybe you'll send me a tape of how you say it aloud. You very rarely probably do say it aloud because what would you go around saying your name backwards for, right? But anyway, you may remember that Gil is the one who handed us the alternative for the Latinx moniker that's been hung on the Latinier community. He had proposed that we try that instead as a non-gender specific label. I think it's a good one. That's easier to pronounce than his screen name backwards anyway. But give him a note, send him a note and tell him how well you think he did and lie if you have to. I'm telling you, you should go and tell him it sounds great. It's a great relief to me. I enjoyed it. It changes up the voices in the show. It lets other people know, there are real people out there contributing to the show, taping segments or sending donations via Patreon or any of the other recurring payment mechanisms that we've set up. PayPal is available for you to do that. We use the Cash app. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll move into Venmo or something really cool and hip like that. I don't think that is absolutely necessary. But anyway, I think a great relief to me, and it really does sound good. And I thought very much in the spirit of the show. Well done there, and I appreciate it. And if you haven't heard it yet, keep listening. We might be able to rig it up so that Justice is able to use it during the breaks. I understand that during the live stream, I don't listen to the live stream because I can't. I'm in the middle of creating it. But during the live stream, during some of our 2-minute breaks, those announcements do come up and fill the time in our gaps. And I'm sure you'll be grateful for the change of pace if we get those plugged in the next day or 2 or 3 or a week or whatever. We'll see what Justice is able to rig up, and you'll be able to hear it too. And if not, listen to the podcast. We'll play it to death until Gil begs us to take it down. Joining us now, Greg Dworkin. Good morning. How are you, Greg?
Good morning. Off to a little bit of a late start. Abby was having a bark fest, and I thought maybe I'd throw her outside first. By the way, in terms of housekeeping, the computer's coming along. I'd say it's probably 92% set up.
It's like the Pfizer thing.
Margin of error, plus or minus 5 there.
Okay.
And, it's working. You could hear the sound, and everything seems to be going relatively smoothly. Some glitches. I still don't have the proper monitor. That should be delivered tomorrow.
Okay.
And, I'm doing all sorts of jury-rigged and MacGyver connections to try to get my old equipment to work on the new machine when the slots and the ports are not the same. And I think they do that on purpose to make you buy all new equipment.
Yeah, I think so.
But it should be smoother and faster once that new equipment gets put in there. So no bottlenecks. So that'll be nice.
Pretty good.
So let's talk about democracy and the fate of the United States. I think that's probably a worthwhile topic today.
Sure.
I want to start by noting that today's Pundit Roundup is the threat to democracy is coming from within the House, that's capital H, Because today's the day Liz Cheney's getting booted out of her leadership position.
Yes.
And why should you care? You're not a Republican. And I'm
Right.
going to tell you why you should care.
Oh. All right.
That is to say, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm trying to convince you it matters.
I see. I believe it. Let's
All
start.
right. Well, I mean, you get a lot of feedback there. Oh, Liz Cheney. You know who Liz Cheney is? Do you know who the Cheneys are?
No.
Well, yes. Yes, I do.
Yes. I mean, right.
I
What
mean,
did I
we've
say?
known since the blog got started around the Iraq War, right? You know, I
Yep.
mean, we go back that far. So, yeah, we know who they are.
We do.
But that's not really the point. I think, one of the more interesting pieces I came across about that was Jonathan Chait writing, Liz Cheney's liberal critics are missing the point,
Aha.
right?
There.
It's not her policies. We hate them. It's about this one singular thing she's chosen
One.
to defend democracy. And you can support her on
Yes.
that and not support her on her policies. You can support her on that and not vote for her. You can support her on that and not want to see her run, or see her run and vote against her and watch her lose. Those are all things that you could do at the same time. You can hold two different thoughts in your head. She's absolutely right about democracy. She had a fiery floor speech last night about that very thing, knowing she was going to get booted out today, where she basically said, you can't support Trump and you can't support the big lie. He lost the election, and anybody who doesn't have the guts and the balls and the backbone to tell you that, the way I'm telling you that, is bad for the party, bad for the country. And you can agree with her on that and still not like her policies.
I will avail myself of that option.
Yeah, it's an option. So that's his point about liberal critics missing the point. This is a singular thing. The defense of democracy is a singular thing. So I'm going to turn to political scientist Jonathan Bernstein.
More Johns.
More Jonathan Corner there. Trump isn't the biggest Republican threat. It's not fear of their defeated nominee that's turning the GOP into the party of subverting elections. And of course, if you get the point there, the problem is that the GOP is the party of subverting elections. So 3 points on the question of whether Republican fear of former President Trump is motivating the various efforts right now. As Greg Sargent points out in the Washington Post, Republicans need no excuse to attempt to make it harder for people to vote. You can't hide behind the fact that they're afraid. Sargent is saying basically they want to.
Oh, yes. Well, all right.
Right. Second is, although there's a counterpoint to that of interest, and that is from Josh Krasauer, conservative columnist for the National Journal. And this one happens to be free of paywalls, at least until May 22nd. Republican voters more pragmatic than their leaders. In New Mexico, Texas, and Virginia, Republicans have avoided the Trumpiest candidates in favor of more mainstream alternatives. So they're toning down the rhetoric is what he's saying. But toning down the rhetoric is not the same thing as standing for democracy. So as Larry Sabato notes, and let's talk about Virginia because we love folks in Virginia, and there's a little local for you here.
Yeah.
Larry Sabato points out Donald Trump just enthusiastically endorsed Glenn Youngkin, who's going to be the Republican nominee for governor against probably Terry McAuliffe. No doubt Democrats will help the new GOP nominee publicize this all the way to November.
Yeah, likely true. I mean,
right? Twitter already knows Trump lost Virginia by 5% in 2016 and 10% in 2020. Trump's an albatross, or a golden calf, around Youngkin's neck, says Sabato. And John Cipher, who's a security analyst, says, so a guy who personally made over $200 million in Democrat-run Virginia is running that Democrats are bad for business. Got it.
Yeah. Well, the message doesn't make much sense, but
right, and everybody's chiming in and saying, and T-Mac says thanks. So this is all going to help Terry McAuliffe, at least in the primary. But McAuliffe is favored to win, and he's favored to win the election. But there's still people who think it's 2004, and George Allen may come out of nowhere and somehow, win Western Virginia, and that might change everything. The state has changed, and people just have to get used to the fact that the state has changed.
Well, I will say, if you want to wring your hands about it a little bit, and I think everybody
We're
does.
Democrats. We always wring our hands.
Right. The one thing that's will make things a little bit difficult to predict with confidence is that Youngkin has now won the nomination, was, I believe, in the last polling that was done, polling at 0%. So we have a little bit of explanation or some explaining to do in terms of where does a guy come from polling 0% and win the nomination. And apparently the answer from some of the closer Virginia political watchers is that he did almost all of his campaigning and organizing inside of a place that almost never causes any trouble, evangelical churches. And that he showed up, not at all in the polls, but was just quietly arranging for an evangelical army to show up in this weird process that the party handed itself for the nomination. And they did so in numbers, and he's the nomination, and no one knows anything about the guy, including Donald Trump, who
the
endorsed
fact
him.
that they used ranked voting, and people who were campaigning to be your second choice turned out to be everybody's second choice, which means nobody's first choice, which means you didn't win.
Yeah.
And the Trumpiest of all the people, Amanda Chase, was already accusing the GOP of stealing the election even before the voting happened.
Yes, right. She announced her intention.
So the point that Crash Hour was making is that they rejected the nuttiest of the people.
I see.
In favor of somebody who's still pretty out there,
maybe.
But sounds a lot more moderate.
Yeah, I mean, they're not famous for running around the state with guns hanging out the window and screaming. So that's a step forward for them, I guess. Hooray. Right. Good job.
The Republican Party is still a little weird in Virginia. I mean, they run people like Cory Gardner, right, who isn't even from Virginia. It's just a commentary on where the Republican Party is. So the fact that even the so-called moderate sounding ones enthusiastically embrace Trump, is part of the deal. Right.
Exactly.
The second point that Jonathan Bernstein makes is, as I've been arguing for a while, it's probably more accurate to think about fear of Trump in hostage terms. Republicans are no doubt worried about primary challenge that Trump could inspire, but they can get around that just like they got around Amanda Chase in Virginia. But that concern is overrated. Trump is still popular among Republicans, but there's really very limited evidence of his ability to determine primary results. And as a matter of fact, there's some polling and some focus groups that point out that Trump isn't all that popular in swing areas. But there's what should be scary for Republicans, and frankly is scary for Republicans, I would add, is that Trump could turn against the party in general elections where he wouldn't need to convince voters to stay home or many voters to stay home to deal a devastating blow to the party. It's a problem no recent party has had with a former president or former nominee. It's not that, he can dictate who wins, but he can dictate who loses. He can tell his supporters, this guy isn't the real Trump Republican. He's not a MAGA guy. Stay home, don't vote.
Yeah.
And if you make too much noise about that, Georgia.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, that's a superpower in a way.
Yeah, it's a reverse superpower, but, that is part of the motivating thing. But third and most important, says Bernstein, whatever the motives, what Republicans are up to is a huge threat to the Republic. I'm mostly not talking about making it harder to vote, although that certainly weakens democracy. The real threat is that Trump joined many other elected Republicans attempted to overturn the 2020 presidential election result. And that since then, those in the party who stood up for the rule of law have been marginalized. That's why the Georgia election law is a big deal. That's why purging Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney from the Republican House leadership is a big deal. That'll be today's theme. And that's why the joke of an audit of election counts in Arizona is a big deal. It's the single most important story in U.S. politics right now. What we know is when Trump attempted to subvert the election, a number of Republicans in key positions refused to go along. We know that. These individuals won't be able to stop a similar effort in 2024. Some of them won't be there. Some of them have been kicked out of the party. And that the party has sent clear signals that standing up for the Constitution and the rule of law was unacceptable. That's why it's important that when Liz Cheney stands up and says, I'm for democracy and the rule of law, you may not like me, you may not like my policies, but you have to understand that this is a singular important issue. We can nod our head and say, yes, it is. I'm not voting for you, but thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's our role in this.
Yes.
Okay.
So how's that playing out in the real world? Well, the vote's expected today. She's expected to lose. It'll be surprising if she gets even 20 votes. It's a secret ballot. We don't know. Over 100 Republicans, including former officials, threaten a split from the GOP. Trump is not the only one who says, I can take my ball and go home. This is in the New York Times. But some of these are former elected officials, and they're going to release a letter this week threatening to form a third party if the Republican Party doesn't make certain changes. Now, there's a companion piece. Perhaps he's one of these people. Perhaps he's not. David Jolly, a new center-right party won't work because the Republicans are just too far gone. So you can't convince your party to come back to conservative principles, so you have to lose and you have to form a third party if you want to reclaim what used to be the Republican Party. Now, the problem with that, as Dave Wasserman points out, is that that sort of thing often attracts a lot of Democrats as well as Republicans, so that's not helping. And at the same time, most of the people making noise about I'm not happy with the Republican Party are former officials, retired officials, people who aren't in a position to do anything about it, and a bunch of bloviators who just like being on the stage.
Yes, that's not helpful in the end. I mean,
so,
like
it's one thing if 100 Republican House members said that.
Right, yeah, that's different.
But that's not what this is.
No.
Right?
Yeah,
I want you to take me with all the authority and the deep thinking of the Simpson-Bowles Commission.
Yeah, well, there is that. That's problematic.
Who are you? I'm a former congressperson and I worked in government, and I'm former this and I'm former that, and I am going to tell you what to say because I have gravitas. Well, actually, you don't anymore.
Yeah. Well,
right.
I wish
so. A whole bunch of people saying that doesn't carry things. What is happening,
Santorum.
however,
yeah,
is that this Republican battle is happening in full view, everybody watching. And interesting Axios information on that I'll get to in a minute. But even those people who don't know that much about politics are going to know about this because it's captured the imagination of the press. And Liz Cheney has won the battle of the press constituency, even though she will lose the battle of keeping her position. And the question on the table is going to be, is she going to wind up winning the war, which is to say keep Kevin McCarthy from being speaker? This morning, says Politico, of all places, not exactly a Democratic sympathetic outlet.
True.
This morning, House Republicans will likely boot one of their own from leadership for the first time in years, sacrificing Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney at the altar of Donald Trump. If that's how the press is going to play it, and they're doing this, I gave you an example, that's only going to help Democrats.
Okay. Well, good.
That is good. So, as the YouTube video says, leave Liz Cheney alone.
Yeah.
Let her do her thing.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe don't let her do her thing, but okay. To
do her thing is to call out her Republican colleagues as being cowards and liars and smarmy people who will do anything for power, because the issue is that we lost the election and you have to have the guts and balls to say it.
Yes.
That's her thing.
Well, as long as it remains her thing, then fine. Yeah. I don't want her to find any new things.
Yeah.
Or
don't
old
do your
things.
father's thing. Just do this thing.
Yeah.
So Axios says, swing voter focus group, ousting Cheney is a mistake.
Okay.
There's a caveat there we'll get to. As House Republicans meet to oust Representative Liz Cheney from her leadership post for criticizing Donald Trump, swing voters in Axios' latest Engagius,
what?
Like that? Engagius? Schlesinger focus groups hold a near unanimous view that Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and his caucus are making a mistake.
Well, sure.
I'm thinking we don't need Schlesinger focus groups. We need Schrodinger focus groups.
I guess so.
If you say what you think, are you now a swing voter or not a swing voter?
Oh.
You can only be a swing voter if you don't say what you think.
Yeah.
That's why it's a Schrodinger focus group. Anyway, the big picture. 9 of 14 voters said they could vote for a Republican for a U.S. House or Senate race next year. All but one ruled out backing any candidate who clings to the former president's lie that the 2020 election was stolen from him. So they would vote for Republicans, but only if they give up the idea that they won the election.
Sure. All right.
13 of 14 said Cheney should not be removed, and it would be a mistake for House Republicans to go through with the plans. Those are the biggest takeaways from the two back-to-back focus groups. And while focus groups aren't statistically significant samples like polls, the responses show how some voters in crucial states are thinking about issues that could shape next year's midterm election. They're turned off by House Republicans' perceived fealty to Trump and the idea there's no tolerance for dissent or critical or independent thinking. They give quotes that follow up that concept, but it still remains largely an inside the Beltway drama. Here's the caveat. 14 voters, just 6 of the 14 voters knew of Cheney by name, and only 5 knew she holds a leadership post. That's how you know they're swing voters.
Yeah, I
They
guess
don't
so.
Crap about politics.
No idea what's going on.
No idea what's going on. Who am I? What party are we?
Yeah.
So I thought this was a party. Where are the balloons?
Yeah. Or these are the kind of people who will say, "Well, I won't vote for any Republicans unless they disavow this thing," and then whoever the Republican is,
Republicans unless they run.
Yeah, right. And then when they run, regardless of what they actually did on January 6th, if they say, "Well, I disavow it," then all right, well, good. You said that's what I said you needed to do in order to get my vote. Here it is.
Only after details of the controversy in her public statements were outlined did most say that her expected removal would be wrong. That's okay. It's all new stuff. And if the press, as I said, is on Cheney's side, and they are, then people will know, and they will find out about it, because this is something that the press will run with.
Yes.
It's
they
drama.
Don't know what their member
is. It's a way to say that I really don't like Trump without saying I really don't like Trump. I'm just focusing on this person who says they don't like Trump.
Yeah.
Right? It's not for me to be the news. I'm just reporting the news. I'll choose every person who doesn't like Trump and write a story about him. I'm not being partisan. I mean, that's the way the press operates in their mind.
Well, that might be helpful once. Now.
Well, if you keep running it is.
Yeah,
so,
give him a chance to do it.
Nobody believed she would stand a chance of winning the GOP's nomination, so the idea she's doing this to run for president didn't really fit with these folks' view of what was going on, because when told that she might, they said, she has no chance. What's the point?
Right, even though they said they would give her that chance. Yeah, that's true. I would like to see some polling that asks people that question, and would you vote for somebody who supported the insurrection or who voted to invalidate the Electoral College votes, and see them all saying, no, I wouldn't, and then a follow-up question being, did your member of Congress vote for that? I don't know. Do you have any plans to find out?
I would like to see that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Very expensive. Won't see that anytime soon, I'm sure. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I was just taking a look at the Josh Kraushaar piece that Greg had told you about, illustrated with a magnificent photo displaying many of the beautifully designed and visually attractive yard signs that control our politics here in Virginia and all around the country. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, we were focusing on the gubernatorial, I love the word, gubernatorial candidates. They also, of course, nominated their candidate for lieutenant governor here in Virginia. And the winner of the race, their sign is depicted prominently in the photo illustrating the piece. We've left something out here. We haven't told you about how fantastic this yard sign is. I've not seen this before, and surprisingly, it's amazing that given the advances in printing, we haven't seen anything like this. But a photo of the candidate actually on the yard sign, which is not the usual practice, but this too, departing from usual practice, not for Republicans, I guess. It's a photo of winning candidate Winsome Sears, Winsome, known as her by her nickname Lose Some, Winsome Lose Some. That's the way it goes. But she won this one. Winsome Sears posing with presumably her own AR-15 in her hands. And I'm surprised that this hasn't been discovered as an effective tactic before. Take a picture of yourself with your AR-15, or just the AR-15, I guess, if you're shy, and put
or
it
shoot
on
it at a target.
Yeah, well, that's true. They've done it in the ads, but never on the yard signs. And this one seems to have done the trick. People said, wow, AR-15, I don't know who that is, but I know what an AR-15 is. That's our lieutenant governor. And well, hopefully it
There
won't
you
be.
have it. Hopefully not the lieutenant governor, but at least the lieutenant governor candidate for the insurrection party.
Yeah.
So
she's all ready
speaking
for
of
it.
which, by the way, friend of the show, Brian Monroe, sends us a note.
Yes.
Says, looks like Cheney has in fact been ousted.
Oust.
And my friend Brand
spot.
Allen on Twitter says, Cheney just now, per CNN, if you want leaders who will enable and spread Trump's destructive lies, I'm not your person. You have plenty of others to choose from. That'll be their legacy. But I can promise you this. After today, I will be leading the fight to restore our party.
All right.
So there you go.
Maybe.
Liz Cheney with a I'm your Huckleberry statement.
Okay. Well, good luck. Hope it works.
Yeah, that's the kind of statement I can support, even if I don't support her.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
yeah, it happened, it's happening, and, all of that sort of semi-real. So, there's going to be a relatively short segment for me today.
You're going to be
I got
ousted.
people coming. I know Abby's going to be barking at least by 9:45, so
Okay.
I'll have to get off early. Otherwise, I know people love Abby, but if that's all the show is, it's hard to tell one day from the next.
Sure. Well, I might try running it.
She doesn't usually update her commentary.
I should just do a greatest hits of Abby and see if we can
Well,
sell
she
that
does
as a
columns
paper.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and gets paid a handsome salary since she works for the New York Times, but doesn't really do anything except say the same thing. But that's why she works for the New York Times.
Perfect.
That's what David Brooks and Russ Stout do.
Right.
So
yes.
here we have other things going on. Matthew Iglesias points out that Biden is more popular on day 112 than, remember, first 100 days. But Biden's more popular in day 112 than Trump, George W. Bush, or Bill Clinton were.
Well, 112 is a tough time.
Yeah. So we'll have to see what happens on 113. But so far, that's, kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So note that. In other words, I saw an article which I didn't put aside. Republicans having trouble, it was from The Hill, Republicans having trouble landing blows on Biden. There's a whole bunch of that. They can't figure out exactly what to do. Oh, inflation. Oh, immigration. Oh, schools opening. Oh, well, what?
Yeah.
The whole thing sounds like a hodgepodge. Again, the central issue is insurrection and democracy. Matthew Gertz, not to be confused with Matthew Gates, Matthew Gertz from Media Matters for America, can't be more clear than this. Fox contributor, former presidential daughter-in-law, Lara Trump. She's still a daughter-in-law, but it's a former president.
Got it.
Fox contributor, former president, daughter-in-law, Lara Trump says Liz Cheney should be removed because she doesn't represent, quote, the views of most Republicans, unquote, who have a lot of questions about this election and can't just let it go. So for all of Kevin McCarthy's, I'm firing Liz Cheney because she's looking in the past and we have to move past this. Lara Trump's on TV saying our people won't move past this.
Yeah, that's not the past.
So
doing it.
Go figure.
Okay.
Then why are you ousting Cheney from leadership? She agrees with you.
Yes.
You people aren't past this, which is why I keep speaking out.
Right.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. Well, what are you saying? Look over there. Border crisis, caravan.
Yeah. Among the announcements of the breaking news of Cheney's ouster is the news that they accomplished this by voice vote. So there will be no opportunity to ask people, and to press them on how they voted. They will all say whatever they need to say to win the press locally. I don't know whether they know what that means, but there you go. So there wasn't going to be, it was a secret ballot anyway. You weren't going to get a very accurate record of things, but they didn't even make them cast ballots. So, okay. I mean, she was conceding the race anyway, basically. So, no
she's
change
been
in
doing
the
that for
outcome.
several days. But, now she's free to really speak out. Well, that'll be interesting.
Hooray. Okay. All right.
All right. The last segment I'm going to do is a little bit more on the pandemic. And there's some interesting things happening. For example, this morning, the World Health Organization released a study they commissioned.
All right.
About
studies and health.
And this is covered in the UK's paper, The Telegraph,
Oh, one of the real ones.
which used to be known as the Tory Graph. but I'm told it's in different hands now.
Oh. Okay.
So this one starts like this. Chernobyl moment. The COVID-19 pandemic may have been prevented had the world acted a month earlier. Global health system was unfit for purpose and major reform is needed, concludes independent review.
Chernobyl.
The Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, IPPPR, led by two former heads of government and a host of international experts, including former UK Foreign Secretary David Miliband, said the international health system led by the World Health Organization is clearly unfit to prevent another outbreak and calls for radical reform. COVID-19 is the 21st century's Chernobyl moment, says the report. The system as it stands now is clearly unfit to prevent another novel and highly infectious pathogen, which could emerge at any time from developing into a pandemic. The 86-page report, supported by a raft of supplementary annexes, this sounds like what I send you in the morning,
right?
Describes the WHO as being underpowered and underfunded and adds it was hamstrung by conservative international regulations which prevented it from acting immediately and independently with respect to China and more quickly declaring an international health emergency. And even when an emergency was declared on January 30th, most countries failed to react, instead waiting for the virus to spread far enough for it to be properly called a pandemic. For some, it wasn't until hospital ICU beds started to feel that more action was taken. By then it was too late, said Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and co-chair of the panel. And they have specific recommendations on how to fix things. Create a global health threats council, instruct WHO to adopt the precautionary principle, take steps if it looks like it's going to be a problem, don't wait for it to be a problem, allow WHO to send teams to investigate outbreaks, instigate regular peer review audits of member states. Pandemic simulation should be run by all member states annually, strengthen the WHO's independence by improving its funding, bar member states from making funding contingent on particular projects, establish a global war chest, and expand the ACT Accelerator, a global effort to develop vaccines and other tools to fight COVID-19, into a broader, long-lasting platform. So make it less political, fund it better, and stop complaining about WHO as serving China's interests. Make it funded so that China isn't the funder, so that it won't serve China's interest. It's always been a very interesting organization. Again, going back 10, 15 years, I remember going to public health meetings and sitting next to the public health experts, ministers from Taiwan, who were at the conference unofficially because WHO refuses to recognize that Taiwan exists and therefore can't be part of WHO. For example, of how the system is broken.
Yeah. All right.
Right. So you have to be there unofficially listening in, but you can't have a platform on the stage with the other big boy countries because, you're not allowed. Well, that's fine politically, but globally, the pandemic doesn't care. And so, having it at a public health forum be that some people are excluded means that they're also excluded from, public health. Not good.
Yeah.
So just one simple example of how WHO has been broken for years and years and years.
That's
another is taking too long, just like the CDC did, but WHO took even longer to acknowledge that the pandemic is airborne, and that changes everything in terms of how you react to it.
True. I mean, the virus also didn't care about that.
Right. Virus also didn't care about that. So that's part of what's going on here. New York Times has a story. They haven't gotten a COVID vaccine yet, but they aren't hesitant either. Much has been said about people opposed to are skeptical of coronavirus vaccines, but there's another group that's yet to get shots, and the reasons are more complex, and it has a lot to do with availability. So let's say you're ever so slightly hesitant.
All right.
Let's say for the most part you accept that vaccines exist, that they should happen. You're a nurse, you work in a hospital, you don't like the administration telling you what to do and that you have to be vaccinated to work there, so you resent it. So, and this is real life, so you're ever so slightly vaccine hesitant, ever so slightly.
This vaccine anyway, yeah.
This vaccine, it's new, it hasn't been around for a long time. So, you're not totally opposed to it, but you're not the first person in line.
All right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Let's say you're somebody like that.
Okay.
If you make the vaccine easy to get and you see that your peers are getting it, you might get it too.
Sure.
If you make barriers to getting it so that it's impossible to do, the website doesn't work, and you can't get to the drive-by mass vaccine center because you don't have a car, then that same person isn't going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's the same person with a completely different take on what's going on.
Okay.
Are they hesitant? Well, it depends. Depends whether or not it's available.
Right.
Make it available. They're less hesitant. How do you classify them? So the whole point of the article is you have to spend a lot of time making it available in order to make it work. And there hasn't been enough, although, people are doing plenty, but there hasn't been enough work on that specific thing.
Yes. Well, there's been too much work on the other thing first. And now that they're winding that work down where they no longer have to man mass vaccination centers 24/7, yeah, they can branch out a little bit. They got the space.
But you could also, have it in your doctor's office now, and you can have it at a barbershop. You can have it at your church. There's a lot of different places you could do it. In fact, says the article, among Americans who said they were willing to get the vaccine, the higher a person's income, the more likely a person was to be vaccinated.
Well, yeah.
Well, that's because it's easier to get to places. You have a car, you can do things, you can take time off of work, yada, yada, all that stuff.
Right.
So if you work on making the vaccine available, you should improve the situation. The other thing, of course, is that now 12 to 15-year-olds, 12 to 16-year-olds are now eligible.
Yes,
and in fact, Rhode Island, even though the ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices that advises CDC, doesn't meet until today. FDA on Monday said it was okay.
Yeah.
Rhode Island's already doing it. Connecticut's going to do it tomorrow. They've announced that they're going to start vaccinating that group.
Yes.
And so, that's going to be a big help too. So vaccine is part of the way out here. And so it's great that younger people are now able to get vaccinated, or they will be by the end of this week. And even younger than 12 ought to be available by the end of the year, says Tony Fauci.
All right.
And he should know, because he works with these people.
Yeah. He talks to them all
Not
the time.
because he's an oracle, but not because he's always right, but he works with these people and he should have an idea what's going on.
Yeah, well, we hope it's all true. I know I have nieces and nephews signed up for Saturday vaccinations here in Virginia. We've been waiting forever for our 15-year-old to be eligible, and now he becomes eligible right in the middle of AP testing and final exams. So we're not hesitant. We're just waiting a little while longer.
Right. So here's the section. In the Bedford Heights neighborhood of Cleveland, where Mr. Grayson and his fiancée, Raina Carnes, live, about 40% of adults have had at least one shot, and nationally about 60%. Now, neither Ms. Carnes' mother or adult daughter who live with the couple have been vaccinated. Like some other Black Americans, family members said they had concerns about safety when they first came out. But Mr. Grayson said he's come to believe the vaccination was safe after observing enough people getting a shot without incident. And Ms. Carnes, a hospice nurse, had her second shot last week.
Okay.
The issue for many in their circle, she said, was not hesitancy, but opportunity. If there's somebody standing here right now who's saying, I got it, everybody in the house who doesn't have it could be getting it right now, we do it.
Okay.
What might help the situation is if it was like Domino's Pizza. You call somebody and say, can I get my shot? And they come give it to you.
That's coming, I believe. I bet we'll get that soon enough.
Right. So if the nation's public health system is ever to have a pizza delivery style vaccine service, now might be the moment. Mr. Biden said Uber and Lyft would provide free rides to vaccination sites from May 24th until July 4th. And experts say the collective risk posed by the highly infectious coronavirus has created a rare moment when public health resources are actually being aimed at communities that have long had higher rates of poor health. So it's all good.
I hope so.
So that's how I'm going to end. A lot of optimism there.
Okay.
And pay attention to what's going on with this, Cheney, because it matters for the country. And, have a nice day.
Okay. Yeah. And you too. And I hope Abby barks her head off to her heart's content shortly after leaving the program.
She loves doing that.
Yeah. We'll see you tomorrow. Maybe your computer will be 95% ready by that point.
Yeah, plus or minus.
Yeah, very good.
The monitor's coming tomorrow, but probably not until after the show.
Okay, well, we can live with that. And then Monday we'll just have all the components together. And
by Monday
it
should be like 100% set up. But so far it's working, so we're pretty happy about that.
I'm glad for that. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming by today and limping along with the monitor problems. I know it must be annoying. And do it again tomorrow. How about that?
I like to see what I'm doing, but, more important than I like to know what I'm doing. And if I can't read the stories,
Yeah.
it's tough to do that.
That does make it difficult, I'm sure. All right. Thanks very much. Sounds like the trucks have pulled up and the barking is about to get set. So we've been spared that. Interesting stories and interesting wrap-ups. One of the things I think we got to keep an eye on with this, with the outreach effort. I hate to be pessimistic about it, but I'm saying I'm a little nervous about the idea of, well, either we will deliver the, Greg just sent a note and said, oops, hit the off the air button. Okay, so I guess he didn't intend. I thought he was jumping out because he saw the truck pulling up and said, oh, Abby's going to bark any second now. I'm just going to make an exit. But that's fine. Usually there's a little bit of, okay, bye. But, don't worry about it. Anyway, what I'm more concerned about than that is this idea of, well, we'll deliver the vaccine to your, if we could deliver your vaccine to your house, you would get it. Okay, let's start doing that. Or we'll have Uber and Lyft pick you up and take you for the vaccine. All excellent solutions on their face, on the face of it, let's say. I'm concerned that the execution might be less than perfect. I mean, execution is always less than perfect. But what I'm worried about here is, we'll bring the vaccine to you. Where do you live? Aha. Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, we don't go to that neighborhood. It's too dangerous. Or I mean, now that we've learned, for instance, that Uber and Lyft are just taxi services, you just hail your taxi in a funky and different way using the internet, which is pretty much the same thing as using a telephone to call a taxi, come to my house. Now we'll start to find out just how much of the difficulty that people have always had with taxi services are they beginning to have, or have they always had, I bet, for a decade now, with Uber and Lyft. Well, I'll bring you to the vaccine center. Just tell me your address. Oh, really? Okay. Well, can you meet me somewhere else? So I have little doubt that there will still be gaps left. I'm thankful that they'll step up and do what they are willing to do to get a couple more people vaccinated. Any more people that get vaccinated, it's good for all of us. But I have a feeling that they won't cover certain parts of town, wrong side of the tracks kind of thing. They don't have to go pick you up, so they just probably won't. But they'll pick up the little old lady on the other side of the tracks, or maybe one or two targets on the other side of the track, so they can say they're doing the right thing. We'll see. I hope that they're more compliant than that, and I hope they're more willing to help everybody out and take a little risk. And I mean, honestly, it's generally speaking not a risk. You're just worried about nothing. But I'm not the one going, so what am I? Who am I to say? Maybe they know better than I do. But I'm a little worried about that. We're gonna have to find some ways to get into the neighborhoods and actually knock on those doors and just say, taco truck's here, and so's the vaccine. You want to give come on out, hold the taco in one hand, and I'll inject you in the other, in the arm. That might be just the way to do it. Put it in the good humor trucks, what have you. There's going to have to be a way that we reach out. All right, more notes coming in here from Greg having to do with the Cheney situation. Let's see what we got. We've been sent the the tweet of Jim Scuto, the CNN correspondent, or I'm sorry, now anchor and chief national security correspondent, who says a quote, passes on this quote from Liz Cheney: "I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never gets anywhere near the Oval Office." A little bit late on that. It's been 4 years he was in the Oval Office, and you were no help in dislodging him from it, except at the very, very end when he was already on his way out anyhow. But I guess the fact that he was on his way out was somewhat in doubt. He was attempting a coup. And, okay, thanks very much for helping us stand around and say, gosh, I hope there's not a coup. We weren't particularly effective in that front either. Other items that Greg has sent along here. What else? There's the quote. And then, how fast was the Cheney vote? Is this Jonathan Martin's tweet here from the New York Times. How fast was the Cheney vote? A handful of members missed it because they were just arriving to the meeting when it broke up. So I guess with it being a voice vote, it didn't really matter whether people were absent and missed it. They weren't off the record or anything, or they weren't left behind because there's no record of it. They just wanted to get it done with and move on. Was there? Did they not hold a vote on who they would elect to replace Cheney? I haven't seen anybody in all of the Twitter chatter talking about at least Stefanik actually now occupying that position, but maybe they'll handle that later on. We'll see whether that goes as smoothly as the rest of it. All right. Let's see what else we have to pass along here. We'll jump over to Pocket and take a look at some of the things that we put aside, some of which is Twitter-based for today. Let's see. I did find that tweet that I mentioned about the weird emergence of Glenn Youngkin. That was, you might have guessed, Ben Tribbett, a close observer of Virginia politics, who made that point, responding to the tweet of Lizzie Hilton, the political and legislative director of Clean Virginia, and formerly a Virginia Democratic operative and operative at the DCCC, pointing out that it was Lizzie that pointed out, thanks to the fascinating tidbit from Quentin Kidd and Michael Lee Pope on NPR, pointing out that 8 weeks ago, Glenn Youngkin was polling at 0% with Virginia Republican voters. A $5 million self-loan and aggressive targeted ad campaign, one $5 million loan and an aggressive targeted ad campaign later, I guess. And now he's the 2021 Virginia Republican nominee for governor. So that is of some interest. Ben is the one, though, noting people had to register to vote in this weird, I think what they were calling it was like a distributed convention. It wasn't exactly a primary, but it kind of actually was exactly a primary. And basically, I would say this. If Democrats were doing this or had arranged for this to be the method of voting for the general election, Republicans would be screaming rigged, fraud, etc. But that's largely because they are all about screaming rigged and fraud no matter what the outcome is. But when they do it themselves, well, some of them trust it. Those who lose the race don't trust it and threaten to sue or demand an audit. Amanda Chase, as we know, has been threatening for weeks, has been saying that if I don't win, that means it's rigged and I will demand an audit. Whether there will be one or not remains to be seen. Anyway, Ben Tribbett was the one noting that you can't just come from nowhere and can't just put $5 million self-loan into the race and turn from 0% to the nominee, pointing out that people had to register in order to participate in this thing weeks ago. And 8 weeks ago, Youngkin was at 0, but his people were registering. Again, he says, everyone is missing the point. That's a fun thing to say when you're a pundit. This was evangelicals organizing in churches before the public even knew who he was. So I wanted to at least attribute that theory. Now, some people were pushing back and saying, well, where did he see this? I have seen no evidence of this. And Ben is saying, this is my own reporting. I've been observing it pretty closely. And what's funny is that this person then laughs and says, show me the receipts. But, I don't know. I mean, maybe Ben has been reporting that. I tend to take his word for it. He is pretty obsessive about Virginia politics, and he may have gotten the story wrong. That's entirely possible. But as to the question of, is he the kind of person who really would have been paying attention to something like this all along? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Fat lot of good it did him, but look, there it is. All right, let's see. Other things that I put away. Yesterday was a big day, big-ish day on Capitol Hill. I happened to see Jane Meyer covering what I guess was the Senate Rules Committee hearing on for the markup that Joan told us about for S1, the Senate version of the For the People Act. That again, being marked up in the Senate Rules and Administration Committee. That was the committee of jurisdiction handling the bill. And Jane Meyer was observing live and in real time and reporting on the goings-on there, and got a lot of attention for her focus on Senator Roy Blunt and his reaction to everything. But in particular, Roy Blunt, for some reason, decided to make himself the front man for attacking was it John Ossoff offering this amendment? But an amendment to the bill that would specifically target, I guess, the targeting that's going on in many of the states, including his own home state of Georgia, the most infamous provision of their voter suppression bill. And I don't know whether they actually included it in the final version of their bill because there was so much of an uproar, but you'll recall making it illegal to provide food or water or any sort of anything, really, to people waiting in line to vote. And in many places where they are creating a backup meant to last for hours in order to discourage people from voting, and the only relief people get is that occasionally volunteers might perhaps bring them some food or pizza or something to eat or some water just to keep them from collapsing from dehydration waiting to vote, and making that illegal because, as you know, water is a very popular medium for bribery in this country. And I guess that's what goes on in Roy Blunt's mind, and he was outspoken in opposing this amendment from Senator Ossoff that would have prohibited these prohibitions, saying outright, well, water could be given to people with an interest in buying off the votes of the voters waiting in line, that well-known bribery medium. Of course, you might have noticed the large pitcher of water at his seat. I wonder who's paying Blunt. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So yes, we were talking about Roy Blunt and his vocal opposition to the amendment that would disallow states from prohibiting or criminalizing the distribution of water to voters stuck in line, or as Jane likes to put it, Jane from New Jersey originally, stuck online. So perhaps that reveals something about her origins. But yeah, he actually said that the water could buy off their votes potentially. And I think somewhere here in Pocket, somebody actually quoted him on this. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. Here I have a tweet that I enjoyed passing along yesterday from Josie Grillas, or perhaps Grias, Grillas, of an organizer there out in, I guess I should say, St. Louis. They're no further south than we are. They're just out to the west. Who comments, look, when Roy Blunt tells you that he is unfamiliar with compassion and caring about his fellow Americans, believe him. And she's passing on the Hill's tweet, including video of Blunt giving the following. Should we bring it up? Can we play his audio? I guess we can, and let him speak for himself. How can I do that? I'll bring that up on the computer rather than read it. Although now I could have read it already. We'd be done by now. But this is an opportunity to add different audio to the program. Definitely going to take up on that. Let's see if we can make it work here. Got to pause it first, and we'll turn up the sound and all that good stuff. And all right, here's Senator Klobuchar, chair of the committee, recognizing Senator Blunt for his comments. Oh, this is actually longer than I thought. Well, we'll give you a sample of his stupid voice. How about that?
Appreciate the spirit of what you're offering here. I actually think this is exactly what's wrong with the whole bill, though, that in Washington, D.C., in the United States Senate, we'd be deciding at a local election the circumstances under which someone could get food and water. That's what's wrong with this bill. I think every state, at least, like all of us, I'm more familiar with my state law than any other, But every state has gone to the kind of lengths that you suggested Georgia has, where you can't wear a T-shirt with a campaign slogan on it. You can't have a button on near the polling place. I know in our state at one time, the law said you couldn't electioneer. We're all familiar with that term. Within 100 feet of the polling place.
I mean, that's actually a fairly typical regulation. But anyway, you get the idea that he's setting this up as, we don't want the federal government dictating to the states exactly what circumstances, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. The key quote, and I don't know where it comes in, but this is a 3-minute and 21-second clip, and maybe we don't want to spend quite that long on it. Well, the key quote was this: I have a hard time imagining that there's some totally neutral individual who organizes providing food and water to people at the polling place without some motive of wanting to express their own view of democracy or politics or candidates. And I get where he's coming from, and I know where he's trying to go with it too. But what he's saying is, of course, the people who are providing food and water, they're not neutral in their approach to things, and I'm sure that they do target, for instance, where will we show up to relieve voters who are waiting in line. It's interesting because he'll only see this one side to it. Well, they're choosing very carefully what precinct they're going to in order to relieve the difficulties of these voters waiting in line. And they're choosing certain precincts where, I would imagine, the turnout is overwhelmingly Democratic. Now, that, of course, leaves out of the equation, you could look at it two ways, Senator Blunt. One way of looking at it is we'll only go where the turnout is heavily Democratic to relieve voters who are waiting hours on end online and are in need of the relief of a bottle of water, just to make it possible for them to vote. On the other hand, you could look at it this way. It would be entirely plausible for this same organization, in order to remain neutral, to declare we will only go to those precincts where people are waiting for hours on end in line. And you know what? That's actually what they're doing, because nobody organizes water drops at polling places where there's no line, because it would be a waste of time and a waste of water. Although I'm sure there are a few people who will be in line for 5 minutes who would say, I'll take a free bottle of water. I like water. Hydration, very high on my list of fun things to do. I'll take it. But it's the people who are waiting for hours on end who actually need the relief. And guess what? There are none of those things happening in heavily Republican districts. There aren't any places in America where 75% of the voters, the registered voters in the area, are Republican, and they'll have to wait 5, 7, 10 hours online to cast their vote. But if there were any, we'd go. If you can find one for us, we'll bring water. We'll bring champagne. To hell with it, right? I'll bet you anything. I'll bring bottles of Dom Perignon because they're Republicans. That's what they expect. If there are places in America where Republicans are waiting more than 5 hours online to cast their ballot, we'll bring the champagne and shrimp cocktail, the caviar. You name it. We'll go. We're talking about slices of Domino's pizza and bottles of water from the Costco. And, one, Republicans will reject that. They won't take it. And because it's cheap and horrible and disgusting and makes us look like Democrats and poor people. But, yeah, they're only going where there's lines. So I understand where he thinks he's coming from, but he's, of course, missing the point. And on top of all that, of course, there's the idea that he has in his mind that people are bribable with water, which is amazing in its own right, and just astonishing to hear anybody say out loud, because, of course, the idea that water could buy your vote because you have to wait in line for 5 hours and you're thirsty and someone comes to relieve you're suffering. And by the way, no, they don't say bottle of water, save your life, compliments of the Democratic Party, now go vote. They don't actually do that. And they don't ask anybody their political affiliation when they hand out the water. They have a pretty good idea what their political affiliation might be given where they are standing in line. But then again, as I mentioned, there are only going to be lines in these precincts anyway, and that's by design. And in fact, not just by design, I should point out, it's actually by your design, Senator Blunt. This is your idea, your people doing this. You're the ones creating the lines, and now you want people to suffer. Why? Not because you're afraid that there'll be electioneering in between, handing out bottles of water to people who are collapsing, but because you know full well that the people being offered water so that they can live long enough to cast their vote, or wait in line anyway, long enough to cast their vote, are likely Democrats, because that's what your state Republicans have been scheming to do all along, create lines there and only there. On top of all of this, though, is the insult that a bottle of water would change somebody's vote. But there's no possibility that recurring maximum allowed by law financial contributions from interested corporate actors or wealthy people in your state or elsewhere around the country, or for that matter around the world, could possibly do such a thing to a senator. Senators' votes can't be bought. Thousands and thousands of dollars changing hands. Nobody seems to think that that can do anything to buy a vote. We got to wink at that and pretend it doesn't do anything. But a bottle of water, somebody who has said, yes, not only do I want to vote, I am willing to wait hours and hours and hours to do it. Now without food or water or chairs or any access to them, now that that's all illegal, I still want to vote. That person, though, could be convinced to say, you know what, I was thirsty, now I have a bottle of water. A Republican gave me the bottle of water, I'm voting for Trump. I'm voting for Blunt. I'm voting for any Republican now because of the water. If I will say this, if you believe that that was true and it was doable, there would be Roy Blunt labeled bottles of water being handed out all over the place. But I never see that happen. You don't see Roy Blunt operatives handing out water at precincts where there are long lines. Why is that not the case if water can bribe voters? You want to do outreach in heavily Democratic areas? You want to do outreach and become the party of the working class? You want to do outreach and become the party of minority representation? The new Republican Party? Hand out water in these areas. No, because we want to campaign on, honest terms. Yeah, sure. Of course. And like I said, I actually said right before the break, you would have seen a pitcher of water at his desk. In olden days, you would have seen a pitcher of water at his desk. You would have seen pictures of water and glasses at every senator's desk at every hearing. But now, of course, COVID-19 can't have that open pitcher. They have bottles of water, which is exactly what's being passed out in all these places. And it leads you to the question. I don't see how you could avoid the question. Senator, I demand to know who put that water at your seat. Well, now, it could have been the totally neutral and entirely nonpartisan employees of the committee who put the bottles of water out for members of Congress, regardless of their political affiliation. It could be, but without a federal investigation, we'll never know. And we'll all be wondering, perhaps it was a corporate bottle of water. Perhaps it was Donald Trump water. He actually had, he had that line of water, which was, I'm sure, just somebody else's water with his name slapped on it, but that should hardly make a difference. If water is bribing people, then it could surely be bribing senators, and I would like to know who put the bottles of water at each and every one of your stations. I sent out a, couple of pictures. Any picture you take, basically, of any committee meeting will, depending on the angle, reveal the bottles of water right next to every member of Congress, because it's routine. Why is it routine? Because it doesn't effing matter at all. They're going to be spending hours there. They at less hours and seated and in air-conditioned comfort, by the way. But they've got to have those bottles of water. And they often only spend a few minutes of the several hours that the meeting actually goes on in their seats. When they know it's their turn and they'll be on camera, they show up. But even if they sat the whole time, as Senator Blunt may have done because he's the ranking member on the committee, it's amazing that's a must-have for all the members of Congress. There's got to be a bottle of water, and many of them don't even bother using it, and that's fine. And I don't know, I guess they get reused, probably so. No additional expense to the taxpayer, but we're paying for that water, by the way. I mean, whatever it might cost, it costs something, especially if it's coming in bottled form. And and you better believe that the staffer who skips it and either forgets to set up the room properly and put out the microphones and put out the little nameplates and put the bottle of hand sanitizer and bottle of water at every station, if that staffer forgets, they got problems. They might not get fired. Might be the last straw. They might get fired, but that's an issue. You'll get called in by your supervisor to get a discussion of that. Why? Because no one can survive without the comfort of being able to hydrate after a couple minutes of stressful sitting in comfortable leather chairs. Except voters. Screw them. But not all voters. Just voters who happen to be in these particular precincts. That's not my fault that they decided to live there. It's up to them. Yeah, you can see what's going on. Anyway, enough rant about that. Roy Blunt is a jackass, and he should fall down a well. Like the rest of them, nothing special. Just, could be a shallow well he can climb out of. I just want him to have a little bit of trouble in his life. And it should be a dry well so that he needs a bottle of water when he gets out. Okay, here's a semi-political story. It has to do with electoral politics, but the person involved has nothing to do with electoral politics, but is trying to. Caitlyn Jenner, as you may know, I guess you could say, running for governor in the sense that she's standing as a candidate of, I don't know how much official paperwork has been done, but okay, they want to have a recall election for the California governor. I don't think it's happening. But anyway, Jenner says, I'm in. And she gave a couple of interviews. There was a ridiculous one given the other day, and I think they're still picking it apart for stupid things that got said in it. There was a first round of stupid things said the other day. I don't remember what they were. They weren't that important. This isn't very important either, but it's here in Politico. Happened to see the story yesterday that I guess looking to avoid maybe the stain of Trump and Trumpism because she's running as a Republican. Jenner was asked, who'd you vote for in the presidential election, 2020 presidential election? And her answer was, I was so frustrated as a reasonable Republican, middle of the road kind of person, or whatever the F she's trying to say here. I didn't even vote. I was so frustrated with the whole thing, and there was no good candidates, so I didn't even vote. I went and I played golf. Interesting. Of all the things that she could have chosen to, went and played golf rather than vote, and then went on to say, and this was somewhat interesting. Somebody pointed out she's inadvertently making an argument for ending the electoral college system, saying, what's the point, especially here in California, for a Republican to go and cast a ballot and it just evaporates in thin air because, look, California's electoral votes are not going to a Republican at this point in time. So it didn't even matter. What about other down ballot races where they don't have to worry about the electoral college? Well, I wasn't interested in any of them either. What about the 12 or I think there were 12 issues that they had to decide on the California ballot, and I don't know if they were all. I don't know whether that's a count of referenda or whether that's 12 issues, meaning I got to vote for president and for senator and for Congress, and also a bunch of referenda that totals 12, but all those things, Caitlyn Jenner saying, I'm ready to be governor, says I couldn't even be bothered to vote on those things that would decide directly how policy is made and implemented here in California where I want to be governor. And everybody thought, well, that's a pretty strange thing to say because ordinarily that makes people mad that you didn't even bother to vote, but now you just want to jump in and be governor. I couldn't be bothered to do the minimum necessary to be an activist citizen yesterday. But now I want to be the first citizen of the state and tell everybody else what to do. That usually makes people angry. But now they have even more reason to be angry because apparently when she must have thought of it as a political calculation. People will love it when I say I didn't vote. I'll be speaking to all the disaffected people. Something. Well, now the disaffected people have reason to think she's an idiot too because she did vote. And apparently had no knowledge of the fact that that's something that's fully checkable. They can't tell who they voted for, but you can tell whether or not they came and cast a ballot in November 2020, publicly available information, and she did. So she's lying about something, and could be, I mean, it's entirely possible that you showed up to vote and said, why, I can't make up my mind as between which one of these two presidential candidates is the least evil, or any of the third-party candidates, and you could say, I declined to vote for president, but I'll vote on some other things. But something had to be done. Otherwise, I guess she doesn't get registered as casting a ballot. I suppose, I don't know, maybe you could get a ballot or, show up and check in and then just walk out of the voting booth without having cast a vote for anything. But what a strange lie it is to say, well, I'll go for the disaffected vote by saying I was so disengaged and so uninterested in politics that I refused to vote. But then it was a weird way of putting it too. Like, for people who are like, I'm so disconnected from the political system, I'm not even going to vote. I'm just like you. I didn't vote either. I played golf all day. Well, that's not what I did. That's not, and I wouldn't be as disaffected as I am if I could afford to just play golf all day Tuesday for no reason. But, apparently she thought that was a great idea. But then on top of it, I'm lying. I actually did vote. I don't know what to make of this. So there you go. That's reported in Politico today. The headline, Jenner says she didn't vote in 2020, but records show she did. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, the author of the article, Carla Marinucci, had plenty to say about it. But, at this point, like, who cares what it is? It's not that Carla did a bad job. It's just, that's the story. So, Caitlyn Jenner pretty much as dopey as you thought she was going to be in running for governor for no particular reason. So there you go. Thought I would add that one in there. Let's also take note of the fact that the federal judge considering the NRA's bankruptcy petition has rejected their efforts. It's reported, of course, over at Daily Kos yesterday. Walter Einenkel putting the piece together under the headline, Federal Judge Sees Through NRA Scheme, that's in scare quotes, rejects bankruptcy filing. So, long and short of it, that is to say the whole thing here. We could just share that. On Tuesday, Judge Harlan Hale, that's a real name, of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in Dallas. You'd expect to run into a Judge Harlan Hale in Dallas somehow. Anyway, he dismissed the NRA's attempts to file bankruptcy, so I'm not sure what that will mean in the end, but we'll see how this unfolds later on. Judge Hale wrote in his decision, the court finds, based on the totality of the circumstances, and that's really the best way to consider the circumstances, if you ask me, that the NRA's bankruptcy petition was not filed in good faith, but instead was filed as an effort to gain an unfair litigation advantage in the New York Attorney General's enforcement action, and as an effort to avoid a regulatory scheme. Well, as many people expressed, Walter does the same here. Thoughts and prayers for the NRA there. Hope you can get through things. Not really. This is a huge blow to the leadership squad of the Second Amendment organization, if you can really still call them that, and more directly to Wayne LaPierre, who was hoping that in moving his bankruptcy case to Texas and restarting the organization there, he would be able to get out from under the myriad investigations the NRA is under in New York. The bankruptcy filing was considered a last-ditch effort, and a risky one by many legal experts, by LaPierre to maintain his dictatorial control over the Second Amendment organization. I don't know why we keep referring him to that. You could just say terrorist organization if you like. But there you go. One of many reasons why LaPierre's play for bankruptcy was questionable was the fact that LaPierre wrote to NRA members that he was filing as an attempt to get out from under the litigation, saying it was dumping New York to get out of its toxic political environment. According to the Wall Street Journal, while Hale did not prohibit the NRA from attempting to file for bankruptcy again, he did say that a second filing would compel him to appoint a trustee to oversee the group. This is something LaPierre has been trying to get around as he struggles to hold on to control during the last couple of years of litigation. I mean, that's a usual consequence, of course, of having your petition accepted, is that your organization moves into receivership and you lose control of it. But he wanted, I guess, cake and to be able to eat it as well. And it's not going to work out. Shortly after the ruling, New York Attorney General Letitia James tweeted, "The NRA does not get to dictate if and where it will answer for its actions, and our case will continue in New York court. No one is above the law." Sounds exciting. Every few weeks, the New York investigations and lawsuits yield new stories of lavish spending by LaPierre. The receipts from luxury homes, fancy travel, and clothing have all been filed in New York courtrooms, and LaPierre and his faction of the NRA had hoped that this bankruptcy move could free them from further public examinations of their management, or rather mismanagement, skills. The bankruptcy trial included some of the details of LaPierre's personal exploitation of the nicer things money has to offer, including a luxury yacht and travel on the NRA's dime. So, those were, remember we very recently learned about his African safari being included among those things that the NRA was paying for. More action in the courtrooms around the country, also likewise covered at Daily Kos by Walter. So, busy day in the courtrooms for Walter. Cold-blooded fraudster. I liked this headline, so I grabbed the story. Cold-blooded fraudster. A judge sentences the founder of, or co-founder really, of Students for Trump to 13 months in prison, which is really not bad considering that apparently he was facing up to 20 years. So, but kind of an astonishing story altogether. The sort of story that makes you say, where's the law in all this? Why is this person not in jail? Well, now he will be. So I thought you might find that uplifting. A little over 2 years ago, Tennessee's own John Lambert, 23 at the time, was charged with being a fraud and pretending he was a veteran lawyer at the tender age of 23. Like most modern-day frauds, of course, Lambert was working his darndest for the Republicans, organizing Students for Trump. Lambert started the group along with fellow Campbell University student Ryan Fournier, who you might know from Twitter as being a right-wing liar, fraudster, and a-hole all around. But he walks on this because he flipped on Lambert. So he's still doing what he's doing. That's the interesting lesson. He flipped, got away with it, and is just doing it again. Which isn't very bright, but that's our legal system for you. Lambert, though, let's see, pretended to be... this is interesting. Let's see. On Tuesday, Lambert, who pretended to be Eric Pope of the Manhattan-based firm Pope and Dunn, among other things, was sentenced to 13 months in prison. I don't know at what point in his lifetime he pretended to be Eric Pope and in what context, but let's find out. According to the Daily News, the judge called him a cold-blooded fraudster. That's a quote. Before sentencing the MAGA-inspired liar, it seems that Lambert pulled in tens of thousands of dollars from people seeking legal advice by lying to them about who he was and the level of experience he had. I don't know how you run that scam exactly. You can't walk around saying, "Hi, my name's John Lambert. I mean Eric Pope." I don't know how it worked, but whatever he did, he stole lots of money from people. He falsely claimed to be a graduate of NYU Law School with a finance degree from the University of Pennsylvania and 15 years of experience in corporate and patent law. Sounds like he would have fit right in to the last administration. Very likely true. Let's see. We are about to come up on our break once again, but we'll take a little sampling of things as we head out the door. Lambert from Tennessee was living at the time in North Carolina and had been charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud by the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York. Not a good place to get caught. He had pled guilty to the charges shortly after they were announced and clearly hoped a plea deal would lead to a much shorter sentence than the potential 20 years maximum in prison that he faced, and I guess they did. Lambert's now 25 and apparently ran this scheme from 2016 to 18.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I just happened to see flying by, since I was monitoring the Twitter feed here, Arthur Delaney from HuffPost. I guess one of the Republicans who sort of kind of voted against Liz Cheney in the voice vote nonsense this morning said that his reasoning, I guess this is the excuse that a lot of them are going to offer for ousting her, such that they will not be on the record saying I supported the insurrection of January 6th. I felt, this person says, I felt she was in part responsible for the high spending in the first Trump budget, one Republican told me, and I guess it's Arthur doing his own reporting here, but I'll check. It could be Arthur talking about somebody else's work. No, it's his own. So there you go. House Republicans voted during the internal party meeting on Wednesday morning to oust Cheney for telling the truth about the election, and then, I guess, decided on their own to lie about the reasoning. It was the high spending in the first Trump budget. That's not Trump's fault. I'm still loyal to him. But Liz Cheney, who said yes to the first Trump budget, as did I, is the one responsible and who needs to be ousted in all of this. Okay, sure. That seems pretty reasonable. Wow. So pop-up ad on the HuffPost page here for, what is this? This is like a local supermarket advertising what's on special here. I don't know what these two things are here, but the last one I recognize, that's spaghetti. And it's giving the prices in a currency. I have no idea what this currency is or what language is being spoken. I find that a very odd ad service, to say the least. But you don't care about that. I won't waste any more of your time on it. Let me go back to the cold-blooded fraudster dude. What was his name? John Lambert, pretending to be Eric Pope, a guy from Manhattan. So once again, this is a Tennessean 20-something living in North Carolina. Is that where Campbell University is? And pretending to be a lawyer in New York. What was he doing? I'm just kind of curious about that. According to reports, Lambert, who is now 25, ran a scam from 2016 to 2018 and took people's money while pretending he would help them with credit issues that they were facing, which is not even what Eric Pope, I don't think, actually dealt with, but whatever. Before sentencing, Lambert told the court, I lost focus on who I was. My ignorance was a disrespect to the law and my country. My life will be forever marked by this poor choice at a young age. And I guess that got him 13 months instead of 20 years, so it appears to have worked to some extent. Walter's comment, I wonder what his opinions on younger people of color making mistakes is. My guess is that his opinions are still 100% racist. and I'm sure they are. According to a 2019 profile in Politico, leave it to them to profile lying, fraudster, cheater, Republican 20-somethings. But he might have been in a diner somewhere, so they had to do it. Lambert's bio back during his Students for Trump days included the following quoted passage. At a young age, I should play some sort of, nature sounds and music behind here. At a young age, his parents taught values of morality and deep fiscal responsibility to him. And then he effing forgot them when he went to college, apparently. According to the bio that was originally posted on his Students for Trump website, he comes from a family of multi-generational business owners who helped to build the infrastructure of America. Those were slaves, of course, that actually built the... But okay, beyond that. But actually he was a liar and a cheater and a fraudster. But on the website... built the infrastructure of multi-generational business owners. My parents taught me morality and deep fiscal responsibility. That's why I'm stealing money from you. Not me. That's Eric Pope is doing that. Now, I'm pretending to be Eric Pope. I mean, this guy is psychotic. Anyway, he also seems to have been a big fan of the lead character in The Wolf of Wall Street, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. That was a good role model. The character is a monumental fraudster. Anywho... he says, remember Lambert's co-founder in his Students for Trump thing, Ryan Fournier? He was totally involved, but made a deal with the feds before Lambert could. He has his own brand now, and it's very Hitler Youth seeming adjacent. He now runs his own shop under, he's Ryan Fournier, Ryan R. Fournier F. He now runs the RF Angle. I don't know what that is. rfangle.com. That's his newsletter where he runs around being racist and shows everybody his stupid fascist haircut, which he features prominently in his Twitter profile. Take a look if you want. Ryan A. Fournier, and bring a barf bag. That Bible reference in his Twitter bio, apparently there's one in there. I didn't see it, but if you click through, you'll see it, is from Ephesians chapter 4, chapter 4, verse 32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. That's very nice. Let's just say that the RF angle Fournier is promoting there isn't filled with lots of stories of forgiving each other and Jesus and such. It's actually a lot of James O'Keefe and parlor stuff. So there you go. So he's learned his lesson by not learning his lesson and continues his own version of the fraud and grift that landed his buddy Lambert in jail, possibly with his help. So there's some justice for some people, but not much, and none for the co-conspirators. Just thought I'd throw that out there. All right. Another interesting piece of news, and probably well worth our time, Dave Weigel writing in the Washington Post, something you probably would have guessed on your own, but it's nice to have it established with hard reporting at this point. Let's see. The trailer 2020 continued. How post-Trump voting laws would have changed the last election. In this edition, how new election rules would have changed the 2020 race. The Virginia GOP picks its 2021 ticket, and the policing debate spills over into New Mexico. We'll just focus on the first part here, which is of some interest here. I got to skip down, although that's the first listed item in the headline, but I got to skip down over the rest of the stuff. But now I'm actually kind of interested in what does he have to say about Virginia Republicans. Glenn Youngkin, any mention of Sears? No, none. But just by way of background, Youngkin, he's described here as a former CEO who launched his campaign with an election integrity task force. Not sure what that means exactly, but I know these election integrity task forces, what they mean is let's suppress minority voting, but I'm not clear on whether we could read it. It's linked. Find out what does that mean. Launched his campaign with it. Was he saying he would participate in one, or did participate in one, and that's how he became famous, or he would establish one for Virginia if he's elected? I don't know. I'm somewhat curious about that. I'll open it up and check things out perhaps later on. But the part I was interested in was what happened down in Georgia. Is that Have we moved into this? Yes. Okay. The 2020 presidential election ended 6 months ago. It has dominated Republican politics ever since. As Senate Democrats mark up their version of the House's election reform bill, supporters are sounding more anxious and desperate about the situation facing them without it, imagining minority rule by Republicans that they will never be in a position to reverse unless they federalize most election law and prevent how GOP-led states can change them. Those states have already changed their laws, though, or are in the final stages of changing them. Trump has latched onto countless baseless theories of how the election was stolen from him, from trivia such as the number of bellwether counties, quote-unquote bellwether counties, that he won. He says 18 of 19, but no one knows what he means by bellwether counties, and it's by no means an official thing, to his confusion that Democrats did better after ballots from urban and suburban precincts got counted. Republican state legislators who have shared best practices, which are actually the worst practices, and model bills have focused more on taking power away from localities run by Democrats. It's interesting, too, because, of course, the Republican complaint about the bill yesterday and all along, both in the House and the Senate, is, well, you're federalizing elections, and that wasn't what we're supposed to do, and local control is better. States should run their own elections. That's what the Constitution says. At least they have the Constitution to lean on in that. But the concept being the federal government with its one-size-fits-all approach to everything, when Democrats run it anyway, is what we need to avoid. States should be free to do their own thing, but when states are free to do their own thing, the thing that they do is say, well, for this state, one size fits all. The Republican governance of the state, the Republican governor and state legislatures say that counties and localities can't be in control of their own elections because things have to be standardized across the board, don't you see? In other words, the whole concept that they reject at the federal level is something they reproduce at the state level. And there, again, they do have the Constitution to stand on, at least in part, but you can't use the Constitution's apparent mandate to leave the mechanisms of running elections to the states if they are operated to the detriment of federally guaranteed civil rights. That's where the issue becomes unclear and difficult, and judges can, conservative judges can cheat things a little bit in their direction, but hopefully there will still be enough federal judges open to, preserving federally guaranteed civil rights for everyone, no matter what state they live in. After all, we do incorporate the Bill of Rights as against the state governments these days. It's been around for quite a while. Anyway, so Republicans are using this excuse and reversing their conceptual stance when it comes to the states. In the absence of voter fraud claims, the party has focused on how to make sure only, quote, legal votes are cast, clarifying that any votes cast without rules approved by state legislatures were illegal and technically unconstitutional. In other words, the whole case that we explained to you that culminated in the federal court decision in Wisconsin, that they're now, this is the big danger of these bills being passed in Republican states, is that they are reversing the state of the law. They lost these cases because there weren't any judges anywhere, state or federal judges, willing to say that the Constitution's mandate that state legislatures be responsible for selecting the method by which their electors, the state's electors in the Electoral College, will be nominated. Republicans, of course, thought that, their claim was that that really means that any change in the particular rules of how the election will be run, what times the polls will be open, how often or where you can vote early, or whether there'll be early voting at all, that all of that has to be decided by the state legislature, and it cannot be decided by the State Board of Elections or the Secretary of State's office. And that's just a huge misreading of the Constitution. And so it may very well be that these laws don't survive in at least in this part, because at least for now, federal judges are still willing to say, no. What the dictates of the Constitution is that the state legislature is the one that has to decide whether it's going to be a coin toss or drawing lots, or there'll be a primary or a convention. That's the extent of the decision that they have to make. And it only really applies to the selection of members of the Electoral College and not much else. But Republicans insist that the opposite is true and that it applies to everything, and everything from rules about how far you have to stand away from the door of a polling place, to whether or not you can have water in line, to whether or not you can vote early, are all now they're all in the control of the state legislature. I'm sure that they could get away with it. The state legislatures, if they do take this stuff up and pass laws within their states about these things, I don't think that they would be invalid on their face just because the state legislature is doing more than they're required to do. But the claim was that they were required to do everything, and that anything in excess of choosing to have a primary had to be also done by the state legislature, and if it wasn't, then that was illegal and the vote was invalid and you should throw out those electors. And no judge anywhere, state, federal, or otherwise, was interested in that argument. So now they're enshrining it in state law. So I don't know whether it stands. But anyway, as is being reported here by Dave Weigel, in the absence of voter fraud claims, they've come up with this idea that, well, if we can't prove that it's fraud, we'll just declare it to be fraud. Every vote that's cast in a manner not prescribed ahead of time by the state legislature is now therefore illegal and should be thrown out, and we should only count the ones that were, in our view, legal, and that happens to be the ones for Trump. Well, anyway, the founders, you may recall that the argument one, the founders said that the state legislatures determine election rules. In their litigation and legislation, Republicans have argued that ballots cast under emergency pandemic procedures, and really anything, that state legislators didn't sign off on were functionally illegal. Again, no judges agreed with that, but that's what they said. There are election irregularities and an unconstitutional overreach, which is why I objected to certain states, said Representative Elise Stefanik when she spoke with the Washington Examiner earlier this week, explaining why she voted not to accept election results from Arizona and Pennsylvania. She has also, by the way, advanced false accusations about Georgia's vote. Democrats don't currently have the votes to pass H.R. 1, which would eliminate or neuter the state-level laws that they're worried about. Those laws have already begun to reshape the electorate. Were the 2020 election run again today, several voting practices that were allowed last year would be declared illegal today. In several states, the number of votes cast by methods since eliminated or banned by legislators was comparable to the final margin between Biden and Trump. In Georgia, he writes, last year, to ease pressure on local polling places and on voters who couldn't easily or safely reach them, Atlanta's Fulton County launched 2 mobile voting units, buses that functioned as fully staffed voting booths. For a cost of around $750,000, and spent plenty of money making it secure, the county collected 11,200 votes across both buses, which stopped in different Atlanta locations at times announced by the county in advance. Joe Biden would go on to carry the county with 73% of the vote. The new Georgia law grounded those buses, mandating that mobile voting stations, quote, shall only be used in emergencies declared by the governor. It also, not the state legislature, the governor. In other words, by the way, the state legislature, in passing this law, declares its right to delegate these authorities to other entities, in this case, the governor. But the reason that so many of these stupid lawsuits failed is that, yeah, it's entirely possible for the state legislatures to delegate responsibilities for the details, the minute details of how a primary election, once it's opted for by the state legislature, will be run. And there's nothing unconstitutional about it. It's a first grader's misunderstanding of the Constitution. It says you're supposed to have the state legislature, decide how elections will be run. No, it doesn't even say that. And even if it did, it's a delegable authority. States delegate that all the time. They don't want to be bogged down in the details of these things. That's why there are state boards of election. People can spend their whole careers on it. But whatever, I'm in first grade, and it makes me mad, so I'm going to stomp my feet. So, again, down in Georgia, they also altered the state's provisional ballot rules, requiring voters who show up at the wrong polling place before 5 p.m. to relocate and find their real polling place before 7 p.m. Voters arriving at the wrong precincts tend to cast mostly provisional ballots, which must be validated after the election. 11,120 valid provisional ballots were cast in the state last year, breaking about 2-1 for Biden over Trump. Combined, the ballots cast by both methods are nearly double the margin by which Biden won Georgia. And in case you're wondering, well, what are you doing showing up at the wrong precinct? Let's not forget that there's video out there of Donald Trump, I think also being covered by, one of the news entertainment tabloid shows. And I don't know, was it Billy Bush with him on that too before the 2016 election? I think it might have been in 2008 elections. Or 2012 elections, when they followed along with him and he was going to vote and he couldn't find his correct precinct. He was turned away by 2 of them, I think. So it happens. Down in Texas, I guess they had the same situation. Weigel writes here, hours before Election Day last year, nearly 127,000 people in Houston's Harris County waited to hear whether their votes would count. They'd taken advantage of a new drive-through voting system put in place by then County Clerk Christopher Hollins, a Democrat. A group of Republicans sued to toss those ballots, arguing that unless stopped, illegal votes will be cast and counted in direct violation of the Texas Election Code and the United States Constitution. A Republican-appointed judge threw out that case, but the election bill, or one of the several election bills moving closer to Republican Governor Greg Abbott's desk, would have prevented Harris from ever setting up the drive-through sites in the first place. The Senate version of the bill requires early voting to take place in a, quote, stationary structure. That's super important. Then specifies a few locations that wouldn't count: a tent or other temporary or movable structure, or parking garage, parking lot, or similar facility designed primarily for motor vehicles. That, says Hollins, would have made the drive-in vote impossible, and it was non-white voters and voters under 40 who disproportionately used drive-through voting who would have been most affected. We often heard stories of women who voted drive-through because their children were in the car with them, or who were caretakers for their parents and didn't want to expose themselves to COVID-19, Hollins said. 1 in 10 Harris County voters had taken advantage of a system that won't be legal going forward unless the legislation is unexpectedly altered before Abbott signs it. Example from Florida. Republicans initially pointed to Florida as a 2020 outlier, a case of best practices being followed and a result coming out quickly. Remember that? By processing early votes before Election Day, Florida avoided the problem that caused so much Republican paranoia in Pennsylvania, a slow count of Democratic-leaning ballots that came in after Trump led in more promptly counted Republican areas. In Florida, you can check online to see if your vote is being counted and if your signature matched. Senator Rick Scott told The Trailer, that's the column, of course, shortly after the election, as he geared up to help Republicans in Georgia's U.S. Senate runoff. The state's GOP quickly joined the effort to change election laws anyway, targeting drop boxes, which about 1.5 million Floridians used to cast ballots last year. Mobile drop boxes in use last year are now banned. Drop boxes at county election offices may be open for 24 hours, but drop boxes elsewhere must be closed when the polls are closed, and a failure to adhere to that will lead to $25,000 fines for elections officials. That will make ballot access more complicated in big cities. The county election office in Miami-Dade County, for example, is in Doral, a ways from Miami's major population centers. What about Wisconsin? I hear you asking. Through at least January 2023, Democrats control the governor's office in Madison, with power to veto any new election laws that don't get bipartisan support. The GOP legislature's bills aren't at all likely to become law, but they set out what a new Republican governor could sign before the next presidential election, if the state decides to go that direction. One bill would prevent ballot collection events at any time before the final 2 weeks leading up to an election. That would have prevented Democracy in the Park, a September 2020 event organized by elections officials in Dane County, the state's Democratic stronghold, where 10,813 ballots were collected. One would prohibit election officials from filling in missing but known voter information on absentee ballots, which was used to complete more than 5,000 mail-in ballots from Dane and Milwaukee County. We know the total from those counties for a simple reason. The Trump campaign sued to get them disqualified, as it sued to get the Democracy in the Park ballots tossed as well. And in Michigan, for a few days in November, Trump and other Republicans pressured members of the state board of canvassers to reject the certified vote, potentially sending the election to court. Aaron Van Langeveld, a GOP member of the board, voted to certify the election. 2 months later, the state GOP opted not to nominate him for a new term. Although Van Langeveld's replacement praised his integrity, the conditions for a deadlock if one party doesn't want to certify election results remain and are not being altered by the various elections bills the state's GOP wants to get passed as ballot language if it can't survive a gubernatorial veto. Michigan's unique ballot measure system allows a state legislature to pass ballot measure language into law without an election if enough voters have signed on to get the language onto the ballot. That's unusual, after all. Some of these post-election changes have been specified and tailored for each state, and to the questions Trump and Republican voters raised after November when they tried to prove that Democrats had stolen the election. Other changes come from the theory that Republican voters could have done more last year to stop the Democrats, such as Texas's proposal to empower poll watchers, partisan volunteers, with the power to challenge a voter's validity. If today's proposals had been in place last year, poll watchers could have videotaped voters they deemed suspicious, and local officials wouldn't have had the ability to stop them. That is, the observers. We would not have been able to eject poll watchers for bad behavior, said Harris County's Hollins. Florida, Texas, and the rest of the states refighting 2020 would also have prevented an election tactic that its proponents were proud of last year: philanthropic grants for local election officials. As the pandemic bit down, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg poured $350 million into the Center for Tech and Civic Life, which offered grants to elections officials who said they were not ready to open the polls under lockdown conditions. The grants were popular with elections officials, partisan and nonpartisan, with big urbanized places such as Texas's Harris County and Florida's Palm Beach County collecting millions of dollars and using them to upgrade machines or buy protective gear for poll workers. Palm Beach County, eh? But after the election, they emerged as another potential villain in the story of why Trump lost. At CPAC, where Trump made his only public political speech since leaving the presidency, multiple panels discussed a Time magazine cover package on the shadow campaign to save the 2020 election, ironically noting that there was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, just not the one that Trump was talking about. The irony has been lost in the months since the story ran. Last week, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis proudly announced that Zuckerbucks, as he called them, were no longer welcome in Florida, joining the other Republicans who have prevented private money from ever again going to election officials. Had this rule been in place last year, elections in big counties would have been underfunded by hundreds of millions of dollars. If Trump runs for president again in 2024, it'll be on rules he inspired and asked for. In other words, he's finally been able to rig the thing in his favor for the first time ever. Now he's got that control, even though he's out of office somehow. Amazing. So that and much more, of course, that's it for today's program. But these stories, probably some of the ones we covered, and many of the ones we couldn't get to, up next with Justice Putnam on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Let's see what's he got on tap here. After the first violent insurrection to overturn an election in America's history, it's always good to remember how Justice Roberts, used raw judicial activism to gut the Voting Rights Act. That's at the root of all of this. What better place to start off on the program? So stay tuned. He's coming next.